The studio lights burned with their usual intensity that Tuesday night. Not the harsh, interrogating glare of a newsroom, but the warm, calculated glow of comedy. A light that had illuminated late-night television for decades, making audiences feel safe while sharpening the edges of every joke that followed. But something felt different tonight. The air carried a tension that no amount of pre-show banter could dissolve. The stage crew moved with unusual precision. The floor director's voice crackled through earpieces with clipped urgency. And behind the desk, Jordan Klepper sat with that particular smile, the one he'd perfected over 12 years of navigating the absurd, the delusional, and the dangerously self-assured. He adjusted his tie, glanced at the cue cards, and took a breath. She was coming. Meghan Markle had arrived with her usual procession. Publicist, handler, someone whose entire job seemed to be monitoring energy levels and signaling when conversations needed redirection. They'd swept through the back halls of Comedy Central studios like royalty visiting lesser territories, nodding at security guards without quite seeing them, murmuring instructions to assistants who scrambled to document every moment. The guest chair waited, empty, patient, unforgiving. The Daily Show desk had a different energy on Klepper nights. John's Mondays carried gravitas. Jordan's Tuesday through Thursday carried something else entirely. Unpredictable, sharp, willing to let absurdity speak for itself. The studio audience settled in, clutching their phones, sipping overpriced beverages from the lobby. They'd come for comedy. They'd come for the familiar rhythm of late-night satire. They had no idea they were about to witness something else entirely. A slow-motion collision between narrative and reality, playing out in real time before their eyes. Jordan's opening monologue crackled with his usual energy. He touched on politics, on current events, on the particular absurdities of American life that had made him a correspondent audiences trusted to find truth hiding in plain sight. The audience laughed. The cameras rolled. Everything seemed normal. Then the segment shifted. "Please welcome Meghan Markle," Jordan announced, and the lights shifted softer now, more flattering. The kind of lighting designed to make guests feel comfortable enough to say something revealing. She emerged from the wings with practiced elegance. The black dress, the perfect posture, the smile that had been calibrated over years of public appearances, warm enough to seem genuine, controlled enough to reveal nothing. She settled into the guest chair with the ease of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. But Jordan noticed something, a flicker behind her eyes, a tension in her shoulders that no amount of studio lighting could soften. She was here for a reason. "You've made jokes about me before," Meghan said, getting straight to it before Jordan could even finish his welcome. The audience stirred. This wasn't how these interviews usually began. There was supposed to be banter. There was supposed to be the comfortable rhythm of celebrity promotion. Instead, she'd come armed with grievance. Jordan leaned back, genuinely curious. His training kicked in, the 12 years of fieldwork that had taught him to recognize when someone was about to reveal more than they intended. "Which joke specifically?" he asked. "I've made plenty of comments about various public figures. Context matters. The commentary about my humanitarian work being more about branding than substance," Meghan replied, her voice carrying an edge that cut through the studio's warmth. That was dismissive and hurtful. The room went quiet. You could hear the hum of the cameras, the distant murmur of the control room, the soft shuffle of someone adjusting their seat. Jordan's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. The particular focus of someone who'd just found the thread they'd been looking for. "I stand by that observation, actually," he said, his tone still measured, still professional, but carrying the weight of someone who'd spent years earning the right to speak with authority. "I've spent time talking to actual humanitarian workers, people doing genuinely difficult work in genuinely difficult circumstances. What I've observed about Archwell's public presentation versus its documented outcomes supports that original comment." "That's incredibly reductive," Meghan shot back. "Is it?" Jordan asked. "Or is it an accurate assessment based on available evidence?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Those aren't necessarily the same as being unfair." He leaned forward, shifting into the mode that had made him one of the most effective interviewers in late-night television. The mode that had exposed contradictions at political rallies, that had let extremists reveal themselves through their own words, that had built a reputation for finding truth through patient, methodical questioning. "Let's actually discuss your Archwell work specifically," he continued. "What has it accomplished concretely? Not mission statements. Actual results." Meghan's composure flickered, just slightly, a micro-expression that the cameras captured and the audience missed. "We focus on systemic change across multiple platforms." Jordan's eyebrows rose. The smile returned, wider now, more knowing. "That's exactly the kind of language I was joking about," he said. "Systemic change. What system? What change? Give me something concrete." "Our partnerships create meaningful long-term impact," Meghan offered. "Meaningful to whom, though?" Jordan pressed. "I've talked to people running actual nonprofits with tiny budgets who can point to specific children fed, specific programs funded, specific measurable outcomes. You have significantly more resources, and I'm getting nothing but corporate language." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Audience members exchanged glances. The control room buzzed with whispered instructions. Someone in the back row coughed nervously, the sound cutting through the silence like a gunshot. Meghan reached for her water bottle. The gesture was deliberate, calculated. A moment to gather herself, to recalibrate. "Impact isn't always immediately quantifiable," she said. "After years and millions in funding," Jordan replied, "surely something is quantifiable. I'm genuinely asking, not trying to be difficult." He wasn't being difficult. That was the devastating truth of it. He was being thorough. He was being precise. He was doing exactly what he'd done for 12 years. Asking the questions that narrative builders hoped no one would ask. "There's been reporting about you seeking guidance from Kris Jenner," Jordan said, pivoting smoothly. "That seems worth exploring given everything else we've discussed." Meghan shifted in her seat. The movement was subtle, but Jordan caught it. Years of interviewing people who didn't want to answer questions had trained him to recognize the physical signs of discomfort. "I value insights from successful businesswomen," she said carefully. "Kris Jenner's entire business model is maximum family exposure," Jordan observed. "Monetizing every private moment into content. That's essentially the opposite of the humanitarian privacy narrative you've built." He paused, letting the contradiction settle. "How do you reconcile seeking her specific guidance?" "Business acumen exists across different contexts," Meghan replied, her voice tightening. "Sure," Jordan said. "But you're not asking her about spreadsheet software. You're apparently asking about brand building, exposure management, monetization strategy. That's not neutral business advice. That's adopting a specific philosophy that contradicts your stated values entirely." "The staff situation at Archwell," Jordan continued, maintaining his momentum, his methodical dissection of narrative versus reality. "Reports suggest significant turnover, difficult working conditions." "What's actually happening there?" "Organizations experience natural turnover," Meghan said. 18 departures isn't natural turnover," Jordan replied, his voice still calm, still measured, but carrying the weight of documented fact. "I've researched actual nonprofit turnover rates for various field pieces. What you're describing as natural is statistically extraordinary." He leaned forward. "What's actually driving this pattern?" "I maintain high expectations for our team," Meghan said, her composure cracking further. "High expectations that create an exodus this significant," Jordan observed, "usually means something's wrong with either the expectations themselves or how they're communicated." He paused. "Which is it?" Meghan grabbed her water again. The gesture was more desperate now, less calculated. "You're relying on unverified media reports." "I'm relying on consistent reporting from multiple independent sources over multiple years," Jordan corrected. "That's not unverified. That's a documented pattern that deserves actual explanation rather than dismissal." The studio had grown almost unbearably quiet. The audience, which had come for jokes, now found themselves watching something far more uncomfortable. a public dismantling of carefully constructed narrative, happening in real time before their eyes. Jordan turned to another subject. Netflix, he said, his tone still light, but the pressure building. The reports have been extensive. Struggling shows, disappointing products, sources describing the relationship as essentially over. What's your response? Creative partnerships have natural evolutions, Meghan said. Jordan shook his head slowly. That's the same language pattern you used about staff turnover, he observed. Everything's natural evolution, never actual failure. But your show underperformed. Your product line struggled significantly. Even Buckingham Palace felt compelled to publicly respond to your jam marketing. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. That's not evolution. That's failure with better PR management. I don't discuss ongoing business matters, Meghan said, her voice sharp now, the composure cracking visibly. You don't discuss the substance, Jordan countered, but you're happy letting the appearance of success continue. While documented reality tells a completely different story. That's the exact kind of gap between narrative and reality I spend my field segments exposing. Your father, Jordan said, shifting terrain but maintaining his methodical approach. Thomas Markle. Given everything about family reconciliation efforts elsewhere, has your own father come up at all? Meghan's expression closed. It was like watching a door slam shut. The warmth draining from her face, replaced by something cold and defensive. My relationship with my father is private. Private yet extensively documented, Jordan observed. Your own interviews, documentaries, books, all discuss it. He's elderly. He's had health complications. He's publicly pleading for reconciliation. He paused. What's actually preventing contact after all this time? There's complex history requiring context, Meghan said. There's always complex history, Jordan agreed. But 6 years of estrangement while he's begging for connection. At what point does maintaining distance become the actual choice rather than circumstance forcing your hand? The divorce rumors, Jordan said, pushing forward relentlessly. They're persistent, specific, ongoing across multiple sources. What's actually happening? Tabloid fabrication entirely, Meghan shot back. Fabrication requiring formal denial from your representatives, Jordan observed. I've covered enough political stories to know that vigorous denial often indicates something worth denying. What's generating this specific speculation? People who wish us harm invent narratives, Meghan said. They need material to invent from, though, Jordan replied. What's the material here specifically? Meghan's voice sharpened to a knife's edge. You're fishing for scandal that doesn't exist. I'm asking direct questions about persistent documented public reporting, Jordan corrected. Every deflection makes those questions seem more warranted, not less. Let me ask about your children, Jordan said, his tone shifting slightly but maintaining directness. There's this genuinely ugly corner of the internet with conspiracy theories about their parentage. How do you handle that? Meghan's anger was immediate and genuine, the first truly unguarded moment of the entire interview. Those theories are racist garbage that shouldn't be dignified with discussion, she said. Jordan nodded slowly. Completely agree they're garbage, he said. But I've covered enough conspiracy theory ecosystems in my fieldwork to understand how they grow. Does the extreme secrecy around your children contribute to that speculation taking root? I protect my children from exactly this kind of harassment, Meghan said. But does protection create space for harassment to flourish? Jordan asked. In my experience covering conspiracy communities, transparency usually kills speculation faster than secrecy does. He paused. Have you considered your approach might be counterproductive? You're blaming me for other people's racism, Meghan said, her voice rising. I'm suggesting the strategy deserves examination, Jordan clarified. That's different from blame. I've spent years studying how misinformation spreads, and secrecy typically accelerates rather than prevents it. Meghan returned to her original grievance, her composure finally cracking beyond repair. You made those jokes about me specifically, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You've mocked my situation repeatedly." Jordan met her gaze without flinching. "I've made observations, some with comedic framing because that's my job," he said. "But everything I've said tonight and previously has been based on documented, verifiable information. That's different from mockery. That's satirical journalism, which happens to be exactly what this show does." "It felt personal and unfair," Meghan insisted. "I understand it feeling personal," Jordan said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its precision. "Criticism often does, especially when it's accurate. But feeling unfair doesn't make it actually unfair. I've applied the same scrutiny to senators, executives, religious leaders. You're not receiving special treatment either way, positive or negative." "Here's what fascinates me about tonight," Jordan continued, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. 12 years doing this show in various capacities. I've talked to people at rallies who genuinely believe things that contradict documented reality. I've learned to recognize when someone's narrative doesn't match their actions." He paused, letting the observation hang. "What I'm seeing from you tonight follows that exact pattern. Every business failure becomes evolution. Every family estrangement becomes complexity. Every documented pattern becomes unfair characterization." He shook his head slowly. "That's not engagement. That's narrative maintenance regardless of contradicting evidence." "I've been answering honestly," Meghan insisted. "You've been providing responses that sound like answers but avoid actual specificity," Jordan countered. "In my fieldwork, I've learned to spot that pattern immediately. It's the same pattern I see from people defending positions that don't survive actual scrutiny." "You're being deliberately provocative," Meghan said, rising from her chair. "I'm being deliberately curious about documented contradictions," Jordan replied, remaining seated, his tone still measured. "There's a difference. Provocative would be personal attacks. What I'm doing is connecting dots between your own public statements and documented outcomes." "This entire interview has felt like an ambush," Meghan said, grabbing her purse. "Ambush implies deception about intent," Jordan observed. "I told you up front I wanted to discuss the jokes you brought up, which led naturally into examining whether the criticism behind those jokes was actually warranted. Based on tonight's conversation, I'd say the original assessment holds up." Meghan moved toward the exit, her handler scrambling behind her. The publicist's face a mask of barely controlled panic. "I won't continue being treated this way," she said. "That's certainly your choice," Jordan said, his voice carrying no triumph, no satisfaction. Just the calm certainty of someone who'd asked the questions and received the answers he'd expected. "But walking away doesn't resolve the actual questions about Archwell's concrete accomplishments, about the staff exodus, about your estranged father, about the persistent divorce speculation. Those exist regardless of whether you're here to address them." Meghan paused at the studio door. The cameras captured every detail. The trembling of her hands, the set of her jaw, the furious spark in her eyes. "You'll regret mocking me like this," she said. "I haven't mocked anyone tonight," Jordan replied, his voice carrying the weight of 12 years of earned credibility. "I've asked direct questions about documented public information and noted when your answers didn't actually address them. If that feels like mockery, examine why straightforward accountability creates such discomfort." The door closed behind her. The studio fell into stunned silence. The audience sat frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. Scattered, uncertain laughter emerged. Nervous, disbelieving, unsure whether this was part of the show or something else entirely. Jordan turned to face his audience directly. "Well," he said, adjusting his position at the desk. "That was certainly something." He paused, letting the moment breathe. "I want to be clear about what just happened." She specifically brought up jokes I'd made previously, presumably wanting some kind of retraction or apology. Instead, our conversation ended up demonstrating exactly why those original observations held merit. He shook his head slightly. 12 years doing field work, talking to people defending increasingly indefensible positions, I've learned to recognize the pattern. Vague language replacing specifics. Defensiveness replacing engagement. Victimhood replacing accountability. Tonight followed that exact pattern. Here's what strikes me, Jordan continued, his tone growing more reflective. I've interviewed people with genuinely limited resources who can point to specific measurable humanitarian outcomes. Someone with significantly more platform and resources couldn't name a single concrete accomplishment when asked directly. He gestured toward the empty guest chair. That's not personal criticism. That's simply observing the gap between stated mission and documented reality. My comedy has always worked by letting people's own words and actions create the humor or the tragedy. Whichever fits. Tonight, her own responses did exactly that. He managed a wry smile. I've spent years talking to people who believe things that don't match documented reality. Sometimes those conversations happen at political rallies. Tonight, apparently, they happen on late-night television with someone promoting humanitarian work. The footage aired that Tuesday night. Comedy Central made no edits. The clips that spread captured the confrontation in all its uncomfortable glory. That's exactly the kind of language I was joking about. That's not evolution. That's failure with better PR management. In my experience covering conspiracy communities, transparency usually kills speculation faster than secrecy does. That's the same pattern I see from people defending positions that don't survive actual scrutiny. Tonight's discussion has actually reinforced why those observations were accurate in the first place. If that feels like mockery, examine why straightforward accountability creates such discomfort. Meghan's team released a statement calling the interview an unprovoked and mean-spirited attack disguised as comedy journalism. Jordan addressed it during his next hosting rotation. Mean-spirited implies intent to hurt rather than intent to inform, he said. Everything discussed was based on documented public information, the staff turnover, the business struggles, the family estrangement. She brought up my previous jokes specifically, seemingly expecting retraction. Instead, our conversation demonstrated why those observations held up under actual scrutiny. He added, 12 years doing this work has taught me that people uncomfortable with documented facts often characterize accountability as attack. That's not new. It's just the latest example of a pattern I've seen repeatedly in very different contexts. For Jordan Klepper, the interview became another demonstration of what over a decade of field journalism and satirical accountability had built. The ability to expose contradictions simply by asking direct questions and letting responses speak for themselves. For Meghan Markle, it was uniquely damaging precisely because she'd initiated the confrontation herself, bringing up Jordan's previous jokes, expecting some kind of concession. Instead, walking out during a conversation she'd specifically requested exposed contradictions no publicist could manage afterward. But for the millions who watched, something else emerged. The contrast between Jordan's patient, methodical questioning and Meghan's escalating inability to provide actual substance told its own unmistakable story. Jordan asked about concrete accomplishments. Meghan offered abstractions. Jordan asked about documented patterns. Meghan called them mischaracterization. Jordan asked her to defend her own grievance about his jokes. Meghan walked out instead. And in that departure, in that devastating inability to actually defend her position after initiating the confrontation herself, everything anyone needed to know about the gap between narrative and substance became impossible to ignore. Some people can defend their positions under scrutiny. Others prove they have nothing beneath the narrative at all. Jordan offered 12 years of earned satirical credibility. Meghan offered walls and eventual departure. The correspondent who'd spent years exposing contradiction through patient questioning had done exactly that once more, because she brought nothing but grievance to defend. Always grievance. Never substance. 12 years exposing contradiction in the field. She brought up his old jokes expecting an apology. Instead, she proved every observation correct. What does that tell you about narrative versus documented reality? The studio lights dimmed. The credits rolled. The audience filed out, buzzing with the electric energy of having witnessed something they'd remember for years. In the control room, the producers exhaled. They'd aired something unprecedented, an interview that had exposed the machinery of narrative building with surgical precision. In the green room, Meghan Markle's team scrambled to contain the damage, drafting statements, calling publicists, trying to spin what had just happened into something salvageable. And behind the desk, Jordan Klepper sat in the quiet studio, reflecting on another interview, another demonstration of what happened when narrative collided with reality. 12 years of fieldwork. 12 years of asking questions that people didn't want to answer. 12 years of recognizing the pattern. When someone brings grievance without substance and walks out rather than answer, the silence speaks volumes. If you want more content that recognizes when accountability reveals what deflection couldn't, subscribe. Turn on notifications. Don't miss what matters. Drop a like. Share this with someone who needs to see the difference between narrative and documented truth. More directness. More clarity. More of what field journalism teaches you about separating story from reality.